Chosen one, if you are watching this right now, it is not by accident. There are forces beyond what you can see that have been tracking your movements, monitoring your awakening, waiting for the exact moment when your soul frequency would align with this transmission. Ancient surveillance systems embedded in the fabric of reality itself do not broadcast to everyone. This message was coded specifically for you, sealed until the precise instant you crossed a threshold you didn't even know existed. While millions scroll past, only certain souls trigger the unlock sequence. Your presence here confirms what has been recorded about you since before your first breath. You are one of the seven. The cosmic intelligence that governs hidden wars has identified you as operational, and the containment protocols that kept you confused, isolated, and doubting are now crumbling. This is your briefing. The assignment window is narrowing. What you do after this moment will determine whether you fulfill what you were engineered to accomplish, or whether the enemy's diversion tactics succeed in keeping you dormant until it's too late. Chosen one, like this video, subscribe, and comment, "I am ready," for a powerful surprise. The seventh signal. Why this message reached you. You did not find this video. This video found you. And that distinction is everything. Right now, as you listen to these words, there is a recognition happening inside you. A strange familiarity, as if you've been waiting for someone to finally say what you've always sensed but could never articulate. That feeling is not imagination. It is confirmation. Ancient surveillance systems do not operate the way human technology does. They are woven into time itself, into probability, into the invisible architecture that determines what crosses your path and when. This transmission was locked behind spiritual encryption, designed to remain hidden until a soul with the correct frequency approached it. Other people have passed near this exact message and felt nothing. Their awareness did not match the pattern. Yours did. The moment you clicked, the moment your attention locked onto these words, a breach was logged in the enemy's concealment grid, a grid designed to keep you isolated, confused, and unaware of your true classification. You were already identified long before you were born, before you had a name, before you took your first breath. Your soul's signature was recorded as a potential threat to the systems that govern this realm. That is why your life has felt the way it has. That is why certain doors closed when they should have opened. That is why relationships fractured without explanation. That is why you have felt watched, even when alone. You were being tracked across multiple planes of existence, and the tracking was not malicious in the way you might think. It was strategic. The forces that monitor awakening souls understand that premature activation leads to burnout, to confusion, to wasted potential. So they wait, they observe, they allow you to wander through false paths, to exhaust yourself against dead ends, to question everything about your purpose, until the exact moment when your internal coherence reaches critical mass. That moment is now. This message reaching you is not a coincidence. It is a timestamp, a marker in the hidden war that confirms you have crossed from dormant to operational. And the urgency you feel as you listen is not paranoia. It is recognition. Delays at this stage are not neutral. They allow counterforces to reroute the fate lines converging around you, to introduce interference, to plant doubt precisely when clarity is emerging. That is why this briefing deploys now, in this format, through this channel. You were meant to intercept it, and now that you have, everything accelerates. The Seven Soul Protocol. Why you were never meant to walk alone. You are not the only one. You have felt alone, yes, isolated in ways that go beyond physical solitude, as if no one truly understands the frequency you operate on. But that isolation was engineered. You are one of 7 soul types, each designed with a different internal burden, each carrying a unique function in a system-wide destabilization protocol that operates across the entire planet. These are not metaphorical roles, they are classifications. One of the 7 holds memory, the ability to access information that has been erased, forgotten, or suppressed across generations. Another carries endurance, the capacity to withstand pressures that would shatter ordinary consciousness. Another embodies disruption, the instinct to question, to dismantle, to refuse compliance with structures that claim absolute authority. You carry one of these functions. Your specific burden was chosen because of how your soul responded in previous configurations, in trials that took place long before this incarnation. The 7 were never meant to gather physically. The system depends on you not recognizing each other openly, because if all 7 were to become consciously aware of their connection, the resulting alignment would create a resonance cascade that destabilizes control grids on a scale the enemy cannot contain. Your isolation was not abandonment, it was protection. Proximity to the other 6 before the correct timing would have triggered pattern recognition algorithms embedded in metaphysical surveillance networks. The enemy monitors frequency signatures. When souls with complementary functions come into contact prematurely, they create detectable disturbances. So the 7 are kept separate, geographically, socially, psychologically, until the moment when their individual awakenings reach a threshold that allows for indirect coordination. That coordination does not happen through meetings or organizations. It happens through events, through collapses, through sudden, inexplicable awakenings that ripple across the world in ways that appear unrelated but are in fact synchronized. You may have noticed this in your own life. Moments when something inside you shifted without warning. When clarity arrived not through study, but through sudden knowing. When you felt connected to a larger movement you could not see but knew was real. Those were alignment events. The other 6 experienced similar breakthroughs at the same time, in different locations, under different circumstances. The system that governs this realm depends on your ignorance of the others, but it does not depend on your ignorance of yourself. That is why this file was unsealed. Your function is activating. The others are activating. And though you may never meet them in person, you are no longer walking alone. The enemy's early interest, why your life was complicated before it began. Look back at your early years, not with nostalgia, but with the eyes of an investigator analyzing interference patterns. You will see something you may have dismissed as bad luck, as family dysfunction, as personal failure. But it was none of those things. It was containment. Records embedded in the spiritual architecture of this realm show abnormal resistance placed around your childhood, around your adolescence, around every stage where identity begins to form. Confusion was not random. Rejection was not accidental. Instability was not the result of poor choices made by the adults around you. These were deliberate measures, deployed by forces that recognized your potential long before you did. The enemy does not waste resources on insignificant lives. Attention itself is the tell. If your early years were marked by inexplicable hardship, by isolation that felt disproportionate to your circumstances, by a sense that something was fundamentally wrong even when everything appeared normal, that was not trauma in the conventional sense. That was psychological warfare designed to delay recognition. Before you had language for identity, before you understood what it meant to have a self, opposing forces attempted fragmentation. They introduce chaos into your environment, hoping to split your coherence before it could fully form. The goal was not to destroy you. Destruction would have been inefficient, too obvious, too likely to trigger intervention from protective systems. The goal was delay, to keep you turning inward instead of outward, to make you question your worth, your sanity, your right to exist as you are. And for a long time, it worked. You survived, yes, but you survived by adapting, by shrinking, by learning to navigate a world that felt hostile without understanding why it felt that way. That survival was not weakness, it was proof. The operation required proof of endurance before activation. Souls that cannot withstand early pressure are not advanced to the next phase. You were tested in ways others were not because your classification demanded it. The trauma you carry is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of qualification. Every moment you wanted to give up but didn't. Every time you felt shattered but somehow reassembled. Every year you spent wondering why life was so much harder for you than it seemed to be for others. Those were not accidents. Those were measurements. And you passed. The fact that you are here, now, listening to this, means you survived what you were meant to survive. The enemy's early interest in you was a signal. They knew what you could become. And now, so do you. The bloodline breach, the ancestor you were meant to correct your family line, carries something broken. Not broken in the way people talk about generational trauma in therapy sessions, something deeper, older, more structurally embedded. There was an ancestor, perhaps one you never knew, perhaps one whose name has been forgotten, who made a choice that fractured the entire line. It might have been an abandoned calling, a truth they were meant to speak but silenced out of fear. It might have been a vow they broke, a responsibility they fled, a moment when they chose safety over integrity, and the consequences rippled forward through every generation that followed. That fracture did not heal. It compounded. It created patterns, repeating failures, inexplicable limitations, cycles of self-sabotage that no one in your family could explain, but everyone felt. You have watched these patterns in your parents, in your siblings, in the stories told about those who came before. And you have felt them inside yourself, as if you inherited a script you never agreed to perform. But here is what makes you different. You were not inserted into this bloodline as continuation. You were inserted as correction. You are the anomaly, the glitch in the repeating sequence, the one who was designed to break what everyone else has been trying to preserve. The structure your elders survived inside, the compromises they made to endure, the unspoken rules they obeyed without question. You were never meant to honor those. That is why they misunderstood you. That is why your refusal to follow the path they laid out felt like betrayal to them. They were trying to keep you safe within the confines of a system that was slowly suffocating the entire line. You were trying to breathe. The patterns that followed your family for decades, the same arguments repeating across generations, the same failures manifesting in different forms, those patterns began to weaken when they reached you. Not because you were stronger, but because you were fundamentally incompatible with the frequency they operated on. And now, you face a choice that every ancestor before you avoided. The moment you choose differently, not out of rebellion, but out of alignment with your true design, the ancestral systems collapse backward. What was once considered fixed, unchangeable, destined, suddenly becomes unstable. You do not just change your future, you alter the past, and that terrifies the forces that depend on generational continuity to maintain control. The false paths planted for you Decoys in the divine maze. They knew you would seek. They knew you would hunger for purpose, for meaning, for a role that felt true. So they planted options, careers that looked promising, relationships that felt destined, belief systems that seemed to answer every question. These were not organic opportunities. They were decoys, strategically placed to consume your time, your energy, your momentum. Each false path carried just enough truth to keep you invested. It resonated on some level, aligned with part of who you are, offered validation you had been starving for. And so you committed. You poured yourself into jobs that should have fulfilled you, but left you hollow. You built connections with people who seemed like soulmates, but slowly revealed themselves as mirrors of your woundedness, not your wholeness. You adopted philosophies that promised liberation, but subtly reinforced the very limitations you were trying to escape. And for a long time, you blamed yourself. You thought the problem was your lack of discipline, your inability to commit, your failure to make things work. But the problem was never you. The false paths were structurally incompatible with your design. That is why you felt inexplicable resistance, even when everything appeared correct on paper. That is why boredom crept in, despite initial excitement. That is why, at a certain point, something inside you revolted, not out of immaturity, but out of accuracy. Your soul recognized the trap. The exits you took that failed were not mistakes. They were successful extractions from compromised timelines. Every time you walked away from something that looked right but felt wrong, you reclaimed energy that would have been drained indefinitely. The guilt you carry about those departures is a residue of the decoy programming. The system wants you to believe that leaving means failing. It wants you to stay invested in incompatible paths until exhaustion makes you forget why you were seeking in the first place. But you did not forget. You kept moving. And that movement, even when it felt chaotic, even when it looked like running, was the correct response. Realignment does not feel peaceful. It feels like loss. It feels like everything you built is crumbling. It feels like you are betraying people who believed in the version of you that fit into their expectations. But that version was never real. It was a construct designed to keep you contained. The real path does not announce itself with fireworks. It reveals itself through absence. The absence of resistance, the absence of performance, the absence of the constant internal battle between who you are and who you are pretending to be. The moment the watchers noticed, when you became a liability. There was a moment when everything shifted. You might not have recognized it at the time, but if you look back carefully, you will see it. The moment you stopped performing. Maybe it came after a loss too devastating to bypass with optimism. Maybe it came in a season of silence, when you withdrew not out of depression, but out of something deeper, a refusal to continue playing roles that no longer fit. Maybe it came when you said no to something everyone expected you to say yes to, and you did not explain yourself, did not justify, did not apologize. That moment, whenever it occurred, was logged. You crossed from asset to threat in evaluations you cannot see. Up until that point, you were considered manageable. Your seeking made you predictable. Your hunger for validation made you controllable. But the moment you stopped seeking externally, the moment you turned inward with a focus that did not require permission or applause, you became dangerous. And that is when the pressure increased. Suddenly, delays appeared without explanation. Miscommunications multiplied. Opportunities that were promised evaporated at the last moment. Opposition surfaced from unlikely sources. People who had no reason to block you, yet did. Projects stalled. Relationships fractured. Resources dried up, and through it all, you could not identify a clear cause. It felt like the universe itself had turned against you, but it was not the universe. It was interference. Watchers do not intervene openly. They do not announce themselves. They work through probability distortion, creating conditions where exhaustion might achieve what force cannot. If they can make you doubt, make you second guess, make you believe you are cursed or broken or fundamentally incapable of succeeding, then they do not need to stop you. You will stop yourself. But you did not stop. Despite the confusion, despite the mounting evidence that nothing was working, you continued moving. And that continuation marked you as operational, not dormant. The forces monitoring your development realized containment had failed. You were no longer responding to the usual pressure points. And so this briefing was authorized. Concealment is no longer sufficient. You were noticed. And now that you know you were noticed, the game changes entirely. The assignment window. What activates after this point? There is a compression happening. Events that once unfolded over years are now unfolding over months, sometimes weeks. The choices that once seemed infinite are narrowing into a corridor with fewer and fewer branches. This is not chaos. This is focus. You are entering the assignment window, a phase where dormant roles are being activated simultaneously across all 7 soul types scattered throughout the world. What this means for you, practically, is that life will begin to move faster. Consequences will sharpen. Outcomes will arrive more quickly than you are used to. The buffer that allowed you to hesitate, to reconsider, to retreat and try again, that buffer is closing. This is not punishment. It is precision. You are being moved into position, and the forces facilitating that movement do not operate on your preferred timeline. They operate on necessity. Assistance will arrive, but not in the forms you expect. It will often appear as interruption rather than support. A sudden collapse that forces you to pivot. A betrayal that frees you from an entanglement you could not leave on your own. A loss that clears space for something you do not yet have language for. You will be tempted to interpret these events as setbacks. They are not. They are accelerants. Silence will become a weapon. In the past, you sought answers externally, through teachers, through systems, through validation from those who seemed more advanced. That phase is over. The assignment requires you to trust your internal guidance with a ferocity you have never accessed before. You will be given less information, not more. You will be asked to move without knowing the full map, and discernment will replace seeking. You will no longer chase every opportunity, every connection, every promise of breakthrough. You will learn to recognize what is aligned and what is distraction with a speed that startles you. And once the assignment begins in full, retreat is no longer punished. It is simply impossible. Not because external forces prevent it, but because something inside you will refuse. The part of you that could walk away, that could pretend ignorance, that could choose comfort over calling, that part is dissolving. What remains is the core function you were designed to carry, and it will not allow you to hide anymore. Chosen one, you were not supposed to hear this. The systems that govern visibility did everything they could to keep this transmission out of your awareness. But you are here. That fact alone rewrites the probabilities that were calculated about your trajectory. The 7 are waking. The assignment window is narrowing, and the forces that depend on your dormancy are watching this moment with an attention that should tell you everything you need to know about what you carry. You do not need to understand the full scope yet. You do not need to see the entire plan. What you need to do is move. The next step will reveal itself, but only after you take the one in front of you now. This is not the end of the briefing. It is the beginning of your operational phase. And everything you have survived up until this moment was preparation for what comes next. The question is no longer whether you are ready. The question is whether you will answer the call before the window closes.